Hi. I say we do another brief intro about our Patreon. Aye.
Yes.
I'm going to make this one short and sweet this time, but short and sweet. But we have a Patreon where we put secret episodes. And it's pretty fun.
It's pretty cool. You should go check it out.
Patreon.com/innerarchaeology.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of like continuing the conversation from our last episode, which is fun. I really am enjoying how it's kind of unfolding.
So last time we kind of, just to like have a brief recap, we really wanted to touch on, some of the most impactful people who have played a role in our belief systems, because ultimately these conversations are really I gain the most insight out of hearing other people's stories. So that's why we do this, right? And so it ended up, because our conversations are quite organic, us kind of focusing on some of the positives. And I think we want to kind of dig into some of the unwanted beliefs that we acquired over the years.
Yes, because it's all. Yeah, it's like, I love that. I love touching on both sides because we are influenced in so many different ways. And yeah, so talking about kind of origins of some stuff we've had to deconstruct. Yeah, I'm trying to obviously there's a big generalized my religious experience, which I've spoken about a lot, that I've had to work on deconstructing. And I had a more fundamental kind of old school hellfire brimstone thing around that. So, and it was also, it wasn't quite a mega church, but it was a fucking huge church. And so
I actually didn't know it was big.
Okay.
That's interesting.
It was big.
In my mind, it was small.
No, it was really, really big.
Yeah.
And I think because it was so big, I don't feel like I built a lot of relationships with any of the leaders because I was just a face amongst a throng of kids that went there. So yeah, hundreds of kids in the youth group. It was just massive. And so thinking about, I don't know, I've been kind of thinking about specifically, and actually the first thing that comes to mind isn't even church related. It was my first semester of college. I went when I was 17, also because of the homeschool thing. So I went, I think a year earlier than I would have gone if I was going through the school system. But I took I think it was officially called it was a design class, but it was an art class. And the woman who was the professor, the only thing I just have decided is that she was going through menopause or something like that, because she was so unhappy and unpleasant from the get-go. And her unpleasantness went to a place of actually being really damaging. And there was one experience that was probably one of my more embarrassing, mortifying experiences of my live.
I just full body cringed. I hate being embarrassed.
And this was one of them. So just prepare to have a perma cringe. We had a project where we had to design a self-portrait using fonts. So it was using font and letters to kind of create a portrait. And I decided to do a 3/4 portrait. Everybody else did a straight on portrait. And I did, my portrait my head was slightly tilted. And so what happened was we put all of when we were finished with the project, we put all of our art up in the front of the classroom where we were all going to kind of talk about the art and look at the art. And I think my portrait amongst everybody else's portraits that all had their heads facing forward, you were having a hard time seeing my portrait. I think everybody was assuming I had the same orientation and I didn't. So it caused confusion. And so what this professor did was she started criticizing my work, but it wasn't constructive. It wasn't, here's a learning thing. She was just tearing me down. And that literally went into, she started, because it was also a collage. Okay, I'm remembering pieces. It was also a collage. And she started tearing pieces off of my collage like literally ripping my art apart in front of the class as she was ripping me apart and criticizing me for my art. And I remember I started fucking crying in front of the whole class, and I ran out of the studio like a Disney princess. So the reason that was so damaging, and it wasn't just that one instance, that was like the worst expression of that, but the whole semester of being really torn down and not built up and really criticized and not encouraged. I actually didn't make any art for years and years and years after that. It took such a big hit on my self-confidence as like an artist that I moved away from physical art and I started doing dance and stuff like that. So I started expressing my creativity in other ways. But I had to overcome some like major insecurities after being like so mortified in that class and so torn down for an entire semester to just even start creating again, art again and painting again and stuff like that. So that was super damaging. And we kind of like talked about in a previous episode, the whiplash effect. We had our whiplash effect, and who's the coach of the basketball? Phil Jackson.
Oh, yeah. Who's the coach of the basketball? Phil Jackson, I think.
Yeah,
from
Phil
the
Jackson.
Chicago Bulls.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. So you got it.
I'm tracking.
Yeah, we've alluded to this idea of this like kind of old school, hyper masculine, aggressive type of education or trying to get people to achieve things versus more of like a empathetic, feminine kind of approach. And yeah, she was just you couldn't make her happy. And that was super damaging. And especially in that she was an art teacher. And for me, the whole idea is that you're wanting to, it's like, so it's not like it's fucking math that you're just like, you're wrong. Like you're wrong because that's not the right answer.
Like you got this wrong. Yeah. Where it's like,
but because art is so subjective and she didn't leave any room for anybody else's opinion but her, it was just like, it was awful. It was really, really terrible. I don't know why she was a teacher there or a teacher, period. So that impacted beliefs around art that so deeply in me that it wasn't until just like, within the last 5 years that I've really sat down and addressed them and addressed I felt undeserving. Because I felt like I wasn't good enough because she fucking like tore me down so much. And so I didn't feel like I deserved to create art and that it was a luxury that I wasn't afforded to me. All this like very subconscious. Which is so sad because like, I feel like I had a lot of positive reinforcement around myself artistically growing up. And it's amazing that like a 3-month fucking period with like this really miserable person could have such an effect. But that's just how our brains work. Like the negative is so much more powerful in creating our beliefs than positive things. Truly.
It's so true.
It overwhelmingly leans on that side. So that was one. And I know I'm not alone. I feel like I've heard so many stories of people who had the art teacher or the English poetry, literature teacher or whoever that just squelched your creativity and made you feel like it just alienated that part of yourself.
I feel like you hear that also, especially among people who are like come out to be really huge.
Right.
And successful.
It's like they had to overcome this thing. Yeah.
I feel like oftentimes they have a story about a teacher who tried to stop or squash them. It just makes me sad because it's like how many people just gave up and just stopped.
So many.
I'm sure so many. I just don't understand it. Like, why would you do that to someone? Especially, like, as you said, in a thing like art where you don't know. Also, like, things change. There are trends.
Yeah.
Whenever I hear stories like that, I'm like, don't teachers know how, like, powerful they are? You can't do that.
I know.
It's not.
That's why I kind of opened it with,
really not okay.
I think she was mentally not okay. Either there was something going on in her life, she was going through menopause, because it was disproportionate. Like how she was behaving was not, I don't think like normal at all. Like she was disproportionately miserable. That made me feel like there was something else. There's something else huge at play. And it just she like fucking took it out on me. And I'm just kind of like,
was that your freshman year?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's especially scary because you just came from being homeschooled and this is like your first year like out in the real world. I'm like so sad for little Emily.
And I was just like that's not safe.
Scary.
Yeah. Oh, and I was so oblivious. I was the most oblivious freshman ever. And it just was like, that's not safe. I'm not pursuing that anymore. I'm going to do other stuff.
Was that like maybe the first time you had experience putting your art out into the world?
In that way, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And then, but it's funny because at the same time, I did have another professor that was more of like a drawing class, less of a design class. And he was wonderful. But it's just so funny that, so I had these two classes and I had one professor who was just very encouraging and very wonderful and embraced all of the subjectiveness of art and like gave constructive criticism. But I came away with the negative so overpowered that positive in my beliefs and the decisions I made in the future. And I actually, for anybody who maybe is resonating with what I'm saying, there's a book called The Artist Way. And that was like my catalyst to reconnect with this artistic part of myself, specifically in drawing, painting, like was where I had my block. But I highly recommend that book because it talks about how your creative expression is not a luxury, it's essential. It is an essential part. If you are a creative person and you feel like you want to create and do those things so many times, and I know I did, I just like repressed that because I didn't feel deserving of it. And having my thoughts shifting from creative expression is a luxury that I only get once I'm successful or accomplished or whatever.
It like literally doesn't make any sense either, that thought.
It doesn't make any sense, but that it's an essential thing.
How are you going to get successful if you're like not creating? I mean, and also you don't need to, I don't know. Yeah. Like it's just such a flawed way of thinking. It's kind of crazy.
It is. But I think art in general is a very abundant, you have to have an abundance mentality to create art. You can't create art if you have scarcity. You can't create, I think, real authentic art if you're suffering from scarcity, because art is inherently abundant. All the paint, all the materials, all the time that takes to creating something that may or may not sell. You might not even be trying to sell it. It is just literally a creative expression. So it's inherently abundant. And I struggled with that because I didn't feel abundant. You should see me using as little paint as I possibly could. It just like doesn't fucking
really
work. And
oh,
yeah.
God.
And I remember I actually had another teacher later who said, if you're going to paint, you have to paint like you're a millionaire. You can't, you can't do this like that. It changed my way of thinking. He's like, you just have to paint like you have an endless amount of money that you can spend on paint. Like, he's like, you can't,
oh
you
my
can't do it any
gosh,
other way.
that's hilarious. Yeah. Whoa. I've never thought of that. It's so funny because I had this whole thing. I had like a phase, and it's actually like a really bizarre phase that I like wonder about sometimes, because it was kind of, I guess, in college where I went through this period of time where I was suddenly very judgmental of people who like pursued art as like a career. Because I was just like, what the fuck is the point? Like, it just didn't seem like useful or helpful to the world. And I thought it was so self-absorbed. And then I actually saw this really weird movie where these people are trying to, it was so bizarre. It was like these people were trying to, the end of the world was coming and they had to pick who was going to go like survive. And it was like a thought experiment in a college class.
Okay.
Do you know this movie? And they had to pick who was going to survive. And then they were going to go live in this like bunker while the world crumbled. And they did 2 experiments. One, they took only like science-based people with like useful knowledge and professions or like whatever. And they got rid of all the artists because they were like, well, we don't need you when the world is ending to like survive. And then their community like collapsed because there was like nothing to live for without art. It was and then they like got a chance to redo the thought experiment. I don't know. This was so long ago. And I remember coming to a realization that and also like confused as to how I like even got there in the first place, because I do value art. You know what I mean? It was like I was like trying on a belief system.
Sure, which makes sense. Yeah.
That didn't really fit my true beliefs. I don't know. It was such a weird period of time that I actually often think about it, because I was like, it was just like a distinct blip in time that was maybe like a year or two where I was so judgmental of this in particular. Anyway, this is like a fragmented thought, but I came like full circle very quickly and was like, how did that happen? Because life is just so not beautiful without art. And I really feel like it's something that's inherent in us.
Yeah.
The desire for it, the desire to create it,
to be surrounded by
it, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because this thinking, anybody who has pursued art in any facet, that is the thing that they have to overcome. Whatever that thought, the way of thinking that you were experimenting with. And you hear like, it's this almost archetypal thing. The kid who grows up, who's that? Billy Elliot. Have you ever seen that movie where he wants to be a dancer?
I haven't.
And he's like growing up in like, oh, that's like a great movie.
Yeah, I know. It was like a movie that everyone was obsessed with, but I never saw it.
But it's also interesting because I was just like looking up, and I know I've referred to this before, but the hierarchy of needs, it's an interesting thing. And I think we form a lot of bias on it because we are like, how can you be painting when somebody over here is starving? Like it doesn't make sense, right? This is the hierarchy of needs at play, because there is at the base, it's just survival. It's food and shelter and water, right? And there are people in this world that do not have those needs met. Because like the truth is that they're all happening all over the world simultaneously.
Yeah.
And then you've got your safety needs. I'm like looking at it. Safety needs, security, stuff like that, feeling safe in your community. Then we're moving up to belongingness and love, right? Actually having intimate relationships and friends. That's the next tier. And then the next higher one is esteem, prestige, feeling accomplished, your career, you're well known for this. You've been celebrated for the work that you do. And then at the very top is self-actualization. And that is where art comes into play. And that is when you have achieving potential. And this is where creativity comes out and art. And when you look back at societies throughout history, the abundant ones, the wealthy societies, they had beautiful art. You talk about the Medici
I was just going to say, this is like one of my favorite things about the Medicis is how much they valued art and how like so many incredible things came from it. Because without their abundance, it like couldn't exist. Because so many people at the time were just surviving. And so they had to like literally pay these artists to be able to have their needs met so that they could create art. You know what I mean? And so to see that, I love it. I love the Medicis.
Yeah. And actually for a long time, there was this big desire that actually me and Luke had, that we wanted to be benefactors to artists, whether musicians or like that was like the goal. Figure out how to make a lot of money so that we can find the Billy Elliot who is not being supported in their inherent desire to dance and fund that process, right? Medici him, right?
Yeah, Medici
and
him.
Which
that's so funny.
Yeah, I feel like would be so, but it is true. I think there's a lot of bias out there.
I'm even noticing you saying that. I'm like, oh, if you had a lot of money, that's what you would do with.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like a judgment I'm noticing I have that I don't feel like is mine, that I chose. It's one that comes from like the world that we live in. I mean, even now with everything that's going on in the world, I've seen people, online or whatever being like, how dare you be happy? Like, what are we supposed to do though? Shit's going down and we're supposed to just be miserable, because that's where change comes from.
Right.
So, I mean, some when you're desperate enough, but the fact is none of us are really like desperate enough for that to be the place where change is going to come from, right? I'm just supposed to like wallow. What good comes from that? Truly.
Right.
But it is interesting to hear you say that, because I definitely have that. And do you know what I'm talking about? Do you ever have like beliefs or something get kicked up where you're like, you notice it and you're like, that's not really in alignment with me, but I still notice that I have it.
It's like an old thing that hasn't maybe been fully uprooted or something.
Yeah.
Just kind of
where you're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm definitely like judging that. But if I actually like think about it out loud, that's not something I judge anymore.
Right. That is interesting. Yeah.
That would be a whole wonderful, interesting podcast topic.
About creativity and art. I would love that.
I was also thinking of like, because I've been noticing these before, because I've been calling them out sometimes where I'll say like, ooh, I'm noticing I have like a little judgment here, but it's not mine, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So if you start thinking about that, because I think I've been thinking about it a lot lately, actually. And when you have that like at the top of your mind, you notice it. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So it'd be interesting to start like maybe thinking about that and seeing like what comes up for you. Do you know what I mean?
If I have starting to notice if I'm making judgments based on something that isn't mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Judgments that suddenly that don't feel like they're yours. Cause I've also been talking about it with a friend here. Cause she's like, I have this judgment around like this particular thing, but I know I don't agree with it, but it's still there.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was like a little side tangent. We're just talking about different topics. It's fun.
My judgments are definitely like on the other side of things. I would be probably quicker to judge something that I perceive as hyper masculine.
Yeah. I was just about to be like sports.
Sports. The sports.
We just talk about all your judgments of sports.
Mm-hmm. And that's definitely, and that comes because that isn't in alignment with my values, which is like way more nuanced than that and seeing the value in that. But yeah, mine would probably be on the other side of the spectrum. So that'll be an interesting conversation as they always are.
I think there's even things if we go back further to when you were younger, specifically, there's judgments around, I don't know. I used to have like, I had a whole bunch of judgments around like sexuality and things like that were like definitely not mine. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's so many different topics, areas, and also periods of your life, right? Where you're like,
yeah,
sure. This is definitely the next topic, but
okay.
Back to teachers who impacted our beliefs.
Benches.
Had to like bring that back in because I was.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So yeah. Teachers or mentors that have had a less than positive impact on your life. Yeah, I actually have a lot.
It's interesting. I'm obviously like, I have mine. I wonder though, I think the ones that I think of that were like that for me, I had such a full body like rejection of them. I think in part because my go-to fight, flight, or freeze response is fight, that I definitely have teachers where I was like, fuck you.
You don't get to have a say.
Yeah. And I just like refused. And also would sometimes be like pretty unkind if I felt like they were damaging. Like there's definitely a lot of those.
Yeah. So do you feel like your fight response kind of like protected you from maybe being super influenced by those negative kind of
because I'm sitting here thinking like, why am I not? I know there were negative experiences with teachers and mentors, but I don't feel like I adopted their beliefs. At least not that I can think of outwardly. And the ones that I think of, I mean, I literally, quite literally like fought back. As a kid, I definitely like would get into trouble for not having, I can't tell you the number of times that I had, especially these teachers, tell like my parents that I didn't have a respect for authority. And I remember never being like, oh no, I guess I should respect authority more. I remember as a child being like, well, you should be something worthy of respect then.
Right.
Like I'm such an asshole sometimes.
No, but see, I mean, honestly, to me, when I look at that, you were a kid who had a strong sense of self of, no, that doesn't work for me, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so you don't get to have a say.
I didn't deal with it well. I just was like a dick. And would get in trouble. Yeah. But that's the other thing is I think in part because I got in trouble so much, I built like a tolerance for it. And I don't think that it never really like mattered. I was like, okay, I'm in trouble. I mean, I wasn't like getting suspended or anything. I was mostly being given detention or I don't know, the consequences seem so, and again, me being like a troublesome kid, like I feel like I need to like clarify what that looked like. It was more like being made to sit in the hallway, you know, because I was like,
right.
I would talk back sometimes, or I would have a hard time like not continuing my conversation with my friend that I was really excited about.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that because I feel, I don't know, when we have a conversation like this and I don't feel like I have a decent story to contribute, I'm like, did I have like a selective memory? Because obviously there were negative influences.
Right. I mean, I think what you're touching on might be like a large portion of it. Is it actually your personality, your sense of self, just at some point, probably early on, decided we, the collective parts of you, can't take that seriously and can't actually craft like who we think we are around that, because it's coming all from everywhere. And I have to like separate myself from that because I don't think they're right. My personality, I'm like quintessential perfect person to be brainwashed. Like when I was a kid, I just was like perfect candidate for brainwashing. I really didn't have a very strong sense of self. I really relied on the opinions of those that I admired or respected. And my religious upbringing reinforced that, because it was heavy on denial of self and that your self is sinful and wrong and bad, heavy on repressing who you are. And it wasn't about personal power.
Those are some serious core beliefs, though, because it's essentially just teaching you, like, right out the gate to not trust yourself.
100%. It is self-abandonment. Yeah.
And think about how that affects everything else. Because then when you don't trust yourself, you're more open and susceptible to other people's beliefs, even if they don't fit you. Yeah. So I think that was like a core difference in our like Christian upbringings, is that I don't think there was really anything that ever taught me that I shouldn't like trust myself. That's like pretty crazy. I don't know. I just am like really proud of you. That's what I was going to say. Because that's a lot.
Thanks. It's been a lot. And I think that's part of why I want to work with people who have religious trauma, because I do think it is just like, it's a very certain type of person, especially who are suffering with a more severe expression of that. Because even some of my own siblings would say something differently, and they were in all the same things as I was, but their personalities, I think they had a stronger sense of self and a stronger sense of fuck that. Like, actually, no, you don't get to tell me what to do.
Like, yeah, like you've told me, like with your older sister, right?
Yeah. She was just and even my younger sister. My younger sister has always had such a solid sense of who she was and her worth. I mean, I know that there were levels that were deeply negatively impacting to her, but I think it was a little different. We're just all different. But I think I had a specific, whether it's like my desire to please combined with the self-abandonment, it just was a great recipe for me to be fully immersed in that. And yeah, and it was super damaging. And I experienced a few situations in my early 20s. It's the dark ages that we refer to of my life.
A black hole that I like know very little about.
Yeah, it was downright abusive, lies, and feeling like being like abandoned, being put in circumstances where I was supposed to be a leader in certain situations, and my leaders abandoned me in that. So I was kind of alone in having to care for kids that were not too much younger than I was. They were people that I trusted. Some were people that I deeply trusted to care for me. And they were just like lies. And I actually think that they were lies that they were telling themselves, but it was just, and I know I'm being really vague. I don't know. Maybe someday
I was
we'll
like,
dive
do you
into
have a
those
story?
things deeper.
I was just going to ask you that.
Okay. Let me think.
I know it's probably not your favorite.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. There are so many layers to this particular story, but I think I can touch on it in a way that feels okay for me to talk about. But there was, when I was like fucking 21, and Luke and I, we were going to be residential assistants, is that RAs for this like Bible school essentially. And the man who was starting this Bible school was literally like a person I idolized. This person just was, I thought, like one of the greatest people in the world. And we were told what the school was going to be. We were promised things like, this is where you're going to live. This is how it's going to be. This is how you're going to be cared for. And the deal was we were going to have all of our needs, our food, our housing, everything was going to be taken care of. And we were going to work this school. We were going to be RAs for this school. So it was just like going to cancel itself out. And when Luke and I got there, we didn't have a place to live. They hadn't even done that for us.
Okay. So where did you live?
We like just stayed in somebody's spare room for weeks. And then eventually they turned an office at the church into an apartment for us. So we lived in this like office situation. And then the food that we were promised was food from a food pantry. It was like expired food. It was supposed to be a year-long Bible school. And we made it 9 months before we were like, we can't do this anymore. And the thing that was like really hard about that is I had functionally, I could go down the list of all the things that were horrible and how it was like the living environment was not fucking ethical, I don't think, our living conditions and the food that it was like expired fucking food from a food pantry. No fresh foods, it was like canned foods for like a year. That's what we were supposed to eat. So anyway, just like functionally was like really bad and not what we were told. But then something happened with the leadership where Luke and I were like not supported. I felt really like abandoned and confused. And they started almost treating us like we were just the students. Like I remember one time we all got brought into the pastor's office and like reprimanded. All of us, the students and Luke and I. And I remember Luke and I were realizing like, they're not treating us like we're leaders. They're not treating us at all like we were told that we were going to be treated. And we're literally being treated like children. And so there was a certain point that the leadership, I think, became resentful towards and disappointed towards the school and the students. And that's the only way I can describe it, that there was like a disappointment and a resentment towards us. I mean, God, I like remember these meetings where that was what was being told to us. Like I remember this man who I had so much respect for just being like, are you fucking kidding? Like, I mean, he wasn't swearing, but somebody was expressing like really vulnerable pain about something they were going through. And his response was, I can't believe this is what we're still doing. I can't believe like we're still here and talking about this stuff. I remember just being like, this is so bad. Yeah. And they just really like abandoned. And it was literally me and Luke, we're 21 and we are like parenting a group of, I think it was like 12, 18-year-olds. It was fucking horrible. It's not a fun thing to talk about.
I can tell. Yeah. We don't have to keep going down
It was
that.
just, yeah, because I felt responsible for these kids. That's why I say abuse, because it was to a level of abuse, not only with the lying, but with how we were being punished and reprimanded, how we were being treated, and just the living conditions that were like not okay. And all those things combined to be this like really, really damaging. I was like sick, like my body was sick. And we left after 9 months. We were like, we can't do this anymore. This is so bad for us. And I remember all the kids, they were fucking heartbroken. And they were like, you're abandoning us. You're abandoning us. And I'm just like, and it was just like, yeah, I am. It just is like hard because I wanted really, really good things for them. And I tried really hard, but it got to a point of, and you know me, like the point that it must have been to for me to
just
quit.
Thinking that.
Yeah, for me to be like this, I can't continue doing this. So that was really hard. And that's just like one of the stories. And there's other stories about being like really abused by leaders like that and lied to and taken advantage of, just taken advantage of. And I feel like my heart was in the right place and that I was like wanting to do the right thing. And it was just so hard. And actually, and it just, I think part of why I have so many tears is because the long-term repercussions of that were pretty severe, I would say. A deep, deep distrust of any authority figure after that. I created so much space between me and anybody who potentially wanted to be in that role, and which was isolating. I felt very isolated. And I longed for that. I longed for mentorship and I longed for it, but I couldn't. I had been so misled and taken advantage of and abused. And then I think the thing that's the most painful is that it created Luke and I had been married only for not even a year before that happened. And it profoundly impacted our relationship in ways that were not good, ultimately. Yeah. What it did was it created a codependency in us because we needed each other to survive because the world was so bad and our world was so bad. But that codependency ended up, it just isn't good long term. And I don't think it's like very viable long term. So, but those are things that I thought, sorry, that was like really heavy.
No, and I actually, so one of the things I like admire most about you is like knowing this part of your story to the extent that I know. And I know there's like more because it's still so painful, but I don't know, you've come out of it with such strong beliefs, but you're not angry or jaded. And I hear when you talk about things like that, I'm like, knowing myself, I would probably be like a pretty angry person for a hot minute after.
Yeah, I had anger, definitely.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm wondering, what are some of the beliefs that you've come to? Because look, in my mind, it's like two phases, right? Coming out of that. It's like deconstructing the beliefs that you didn't want from that situation and pushing back on it. But then and how I know you've come to like reassemble some of your own like core beliefs that definitely like come from that, right? Anytime we have, we both have this, we believe that anytime that you have something that's like really dark and difficult in life and you heal, you have like core beliefs that come out of it, right? That are ultimately something that you're grateful for. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if anything like comes to your mind now, like core beliefs that probably took like years and years and years for you to maybe get to, but you can like trace back came from that.
100%. I do have a few that come to mind right off the bat. And there was that 9 months, but there was also like the year before that. And there were like a few things that happened within like a 3-year period that kind of all influenced, I think, the pain that you were kind of seeing. But a huge thing is around self-worth. And because I think that I had such a low sense of self-worth due to my beliefs around self-sacrifice and denial of self is righteous. So I really did feel like a worthless piece of shit. And thank God for Jesus who made me, decent or whatever. So the idea of like self-worth, which it was something that grew after that because it was very much like, I will never put myself in a situation like that again. You know what I mean? To that extent, I will never allow myself to be treated like that by an authority figure just because I deserve to be treated better as a human.
Yes.
Real basic shit, Yeah. And then there was also a distinction between, because I do believe that there is something around giving of yourself and maybe persevering through some discomfort to give something of yourself that maybe would be really impactful for somebody else. But it ultimately is like a net positive thing across the board. Like there's a distinction between that, which I would say all your mission work and all the things that you did as like a high schooler, that was a sacrifice in a sense. Like you were giving up your spring vacations and it was probably costing you money to fly to Ecuador and doing all those things. But it was a net positive thing because of the experience and everything that you were doing. It was like so beneficial to your life, as well as the service that you were doing for these other people. I think I had to learn the distinction between self-sacrifice to a level of self-abandonment where I was suffering in a huge way. And I was actually not okay. My body was not okay. Like just health-wise, my body was not okay. I was not okay emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Everything was being abandoned and abused for the sake of this ideal service or sacrifice for God. I think that there was like a distinction that I needed to make between self-abandonment and what truly like serving in an impactful way looks like. Because I don't think it's abandoning yourself, because I don't think you can show up in the world in an impactful way if you fucking abandon yourself.
I think that's like a really important message for so many people. I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it kind of influenced this, which we've touched on a little bit, but this like desire for comfort in my life. And I do think there's maybe negative and positive expressions of that. It was almost like I developed a value around, or a standard of like, this is like the standard of where my life is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can launch above, like, I'm not going to go below this standard. You know, I'm not going to like, I've got my like level of like
your baseline. Your comfort baseline. Yeah.
Because my comfort baseline was so low and like so not okay and not sustainable for a relationship or even being like a healthy, okay person. It just like was not good. So there was a baseline. And I think that was like really important for me to just feel okay and feel like I'm having my needs met, just like basic shit, like good food, rest, having stability, and like just like living in the same place. Luke and I didn't live in the same place for longer than, I guess that would have been the longest time. The 6 months that we actually had that apartment was the longest we like actually were in the same space. And before then, I mean, I remember we like joked around in the beginning that the first 2 years of marriage, we slept in like, it was something like 35 different places that we like lived. Mm-hmm. For me, that wasn't a really like sustainable way to build anything. Yeah. Did that kind of answer that?
Yes.
Like,
and actually it's funny. I'm just going to briefly touch on this because it's like, I don't know, I think a little interesting considering like what we love to talk about. But I remember noticing your baseline comfort thing early on in our friendship without knowing a ton of backstory.
Uh-huh.
And my judgment of you was that you were just kind of like soft.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Like, I know that's how it comes across.
Also, like,
yeah,
you know me, I'm like mountain biking. I like love to put myself in these places where I'm uncomfortable and like, you know, I'm like, yeah, ice baths. That sounds miserable. Let's do it. Wim Hof. Like that's just like who I am. So I remember early on noticing the comfort baseline thing and being like, she's a little soft.
I just want things easy.
Like,
yeah.
And then as random tidbits of like your story came out, like in the horse stables in these 2 years, I was like, I'm sure you remember me being like, wait, what? Like, yeah. You know, like the Scotland story, like the coldest you've ever been. When we talked about that. That's on our Patreon. Uh-huh. Just so many times, like stories like that would come out. And then it painted a more complete picture of you for me where I was like, oh, that's why she has this like comfort baseline thing. And that's why when I'm like, let's go camping, we'll just like sleep in the woods. And you're like, nah, I'm good.
Been there, done that. Yeah. Very much like conscious decision to not.
Yeah. That's how our brains are wired. And so my judgments were like soft, maybe even weak. You know, when really it comes from a place of you being very strong and very too tolerant of like a lot of pain.
Almost like boundaries.
Yeah, it's like
it was almost like a boundary
in
for
place. And now I
was like, I will not suffer. That was like my boundary. I was like, I am not going to suffer in any way. Like, I just don't want to do it right now. I don't want to suffer. And I also had like little children.
Yeah. Now I see it as a strength of yours. And it's just funny to remember back on our like initial friendship and to see how I totally like was like, aw.
She's just a little softy.
She's so delicate.
I know, it's funny. And it's like, it is something I think I'm to a place in my life or that I'm going to be able to push back on a little bit more and create.
Experiencing interest in that lately. Yeah.
Yes. And we talked about it in that episode, which is great. And you should go check it out. Another incentive to Patreon us. That we talked about how I have associated so much negativity with discomfort, right? That it's like inherently suffering because I experienced so much discomfort that was suffering, and it was bad and damaging and bad for my life, bad for my mental health, bad for my body. But then like even talking about what we touched on the last episode, like working at the horse stables, that was fucking challenging and exhausting and super uncomfortable, but it was a great experience for me. So I've had both, but I think that there was just such a sustained period of time that I think I needed to heal. I think while my girls were little, there was like a 6-year period of time that I just was like, I need to heal, and I'm not going to go sleep on the ground in the woods. It's just not part of healing for me. For me, I'm going to curl up in my soft blanket with my books and my candle, and I'm going to heal. Yeah, I do feel like now that my girls are getting older, I'm in a place where I feel like I've done a lot of recovering and healing, you know?
You've built an incredible amount of self-trust over, you know, the last years, and you're still like really like, that's still a big thing that's going on in your life right now even. And I think it'll be fun because I want to we've never really done anything like that together, but I would like love, I don't know. Let's go on like
I know we're talking about
long, like that horse packing.
The horse track in
Mongolia,
Italy that I sent you. Yeah, no, Italy, the Italian one.
Okay, anyway, I'm so scared of horses.
I mean, Mongolia would be fun too. Fuck.
So sad that I'm scared of horses.
I know.
I think I can overcome it though. It's on the list of things to overcome.
That would do it.
Huh?
Like a week on the back of a horse. I feel like that would be an antidote.
Oh my god!
Just like
let's do that.
Let's
do it this year.
Love to do that. I am so down. I feel like that would be transformational.
This summer, we're going on a horse packing trip.
Horse track, yeah.
I love
seeking some discomfort and
I'm telling you, discomfort is like, it's where it's at.
There's a difference between consensual discomfort and non-consensual discomfort.
Yes, you read my mind. Yeah. That's going to be, and I think that's going to be important for you too, when you consent to a little discomfort and you like can come, I don't know, out a little stronger because
I feel like it'll be really powerful. Yeah. Ooh,
I'm excited
that is something
for that.
That is like, I think that's the next phase. Yeah. Consensual discomfort.
Yeah.
For growth and enlightenment.
Discomfort. I think honestly that's a good point because I don't think there isn't a lot of experiences in my life where I experience non-consensual discomfort. I mean, there have been things where I was like consensual discomfort that turned into discomfort to a degree that I was like, oh, fuck, this was wait a minute. Where I got like stuck in the woods for 8 hours when it was supposed to be an hour trip, things like that. But again, I still like the original point was I consented to it. So even that's not like non-consensual really. So yeah, I don't even know.
And there also is a distinction in this whole conversation between, because that's like physical discomfort, mental discomfort for like overcoming. And some of the things that I experienced were on a level of like mental and spiritual abuse. Yeah. That is not ever like, okay. And ever. And it's just this other, so it was like, it was like this amazing trifecta or quadfecta. Wait, what? Yeah. Did I just make up a word? It was spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional discomfort. And none of it was consensual. But it makes me feel good because I do feel like I had some judgments towards myself that were similar to like even some of the maybe initial takes that you had on me, that I was just scared.
Yeah, I don't feel that way at all about you
like,
anymore.
Small.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, even though I do feel like maybe there was a phase that I felt really small, especially like after it was like my tail was tucked between my legs and I was just like, what happened to me? But I do feel like ultimately me choosing this comfort was a form of healing for me. And it was important. And it's been really good for me to give myself permission to name it and say that. Cause I do feel like I think I've had judgments towards myself. Like, why am I like this? I haven't been like this all the way up until now. And now I'm like this and what's going on. But I think with time
also
and
you had like
and,
2 young babies. I think that's a natural point in life in which I think that's why I'm like, we got to get on horses quick because like I want to go into like what I have now in the way I imagine it is when you have like small children, you like literally go into a bubble because that's what you have to do. You have to like protect your bait, your very young babies. And I don't know. I think it makes sense, you know?
Your world does get kind of small. It gets kind of insulated. You're in a womb. You're in a nest.
Yeah, you're like in a little nest.
You're raising your young. Yeah. And it really, for me, it was until my girls were like full-blown school age. Actually, kind of even until they were like, my youngest was in first grade. That was like when I was like, oh, okay, things are shifting and I can kind of come out of, come peek out of this nest.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, intentional discomfort is in the future. I think that would be great. I would love it. I would love to do it with you.
Really enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. I think that would be really.
That sounds like fun.
Can you imagine the podcasts that we would be able to make after that?
Type 2 fun. That's what my friend Stephanie calls it, where she's like, the fun that isn't really fun in the moment, but like is fun to look back on.
Yeah.
I like type 2 fun.
Yeah. I like type 1 fun.
Yeah, the one that's all that's just like
during. Just like fun the whole time.
I mean, I like both, but like I definitely like type 2 fun. All right.
Yeah.
I love you. And
love you.
I'm glad we talked about this. I know this was tough. I'm glad we went there.
Yeah.
I think it was important. I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful. I don't know. I hope it's because it's also, I think, really easy if anybody like is resonating with my story. And I know there's so many people out there that have experienced spiritual abuse. It took me a long time to be able to see it for what it was and to validate that. And so I'm hoping that by me telling my story, if anybody resonates with any part of that, that it gives you permission to call it what it is.
And to be okay with raising your comfort baseline, not feeling guilty about it, or like you're like, yeah, you can raise that comfort baseline. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that's like a whole thing. I feel like we stumbled onto like a whole thing that I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about. Because I've heard of like self-care and like stuff like that.
Raising
but like
your comfort baselines, I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that. Because for me, that's like, I mean, I've have my own version of that.
Yeah.
And it's weird. Like it's so many weird little things, not setting alarms in the morning. Not having to wake up to an alarm. Would be cool
that would be cool to talk about. Yeah.
To sit in fluorescent lighting, not having to deal with winter. I've done my own.
Yes. You're so right.
Eliminating winter from my life unless I choose to go to visit winter for like a weekend.
Right. And it's like you've created an environment for you to really heal, one, but also I think to be like the best version of yourself, you know?
Yeah.
That's a cool thought. I like this thought. Okay. We'll revisit it for sure. I love you. Thank you for holding space for me and my big feels.
No, it's a thing. It's a thing that we're doing on this podcast, getting like real vulnerable. And I think I want that. I want more conversations like that. Because when I hear people tell their stories, my empathy grows, my understanding of myself grows. And I don't know. Thanks for sharing it because I know it was not comfortable.
Yeah. I love you so much.
I love you too.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Bye.